Here in Germany, there's a sort of moral adage, a piece of wisdom that is usually told to kids, but that is, I think, actually much deeper than that. It goes much deeper than that. And that is, to translate very roughly, it takes two to quarrel. And I want to analyze this expression. And the first level of analysis is that the adage is very true in a very banal way. If there aren't at least two sides to a fight, it's definitionally not a fight. I cannot fight, at least not in core usage of the word, fight alone. I have to fight something, and in the context of human conflict, I have to fight someone. So it's definitionally true that it does take two to quarrel. But like I said, it's not just a statement about grammar. Our adage, it takes two to quarrel, isn't a statement about how the word quarrel or fight works. It's a statement on the moralities of the matter. It implies that those who fight are all responsible for the fight existing. So grammar bleeds over into moral judgment here. And I think that the unthinking equalization of the grammar of words like quarrel or fight or struggle with moral judgments pertaining to actions in the context of these concepts is very problematic, morally speaking, and it's actually, to me at least, very dishonest to frame things like that. So what we have here, rhetorically speaking, is a trope. We would probably want to classify it as a formal trope. That is, the actual facts of the matter that we are commenting on by using the adage, it takes two to quarrel, don't matter all that much. What matters is that there is some sort of quarrel, and by employing the adage, we imply that both sides of the conflict, two people in this case, share responsibility for the fight existing, which in turn is implied to be a bad thing. Now, are fights a bad thing? Generally speaking, yes. We should avoid fights where we can. So that implication isn't very, very problematic. However, it's the other one that I'm after. The idea that because fights are in a morally relevant way caused by two people, two sides, both sides share responsibility for the fight no matter what, is a position that I hope to examine and show that it is morally, quite frankly, reprehensible. So I hope you're prepared to follow me further down the rabbit hole of implication, because I want to look at what the implication is of the statement that fights load both or all parties with moral responsibility for that fight. What does that mean? First of all, it means that not only are fights in an abstract sense a bad thing, which I have conceded, but also it implies that taking part in a fight in whatever capacity is maybe not totally wrong, but not optimal, morally speaking. You shouldn't be in a fight. So let's reiterate the steps of implication that we've discovered that seem to be apparent in the way that the adage is used. We've gone from the word fight, quarrel, grammatically requires two sides, to a fight causally requires two sides. That is, a fight only exists when two sides are taking some kind of active part in it. And from there, we've gone to the argument that fights generally being a bad thing, it is morally bad to be a participant in a fight. And this is a logically solid argument. Without further work being done, there's little we can say about it. It seems obvious. However, there is more to say about it. And the core problem, argumentatively speaking, seems to me to rest with the causality question. Is it really true that fights, causally speaking, only exist when two sides or more are taking an active part? And I think the answer is quite clearly no. And this is where we have to leave the common usage of words behind. The surface grammar of fighting words has to be abandoned at this point. Morally, to me, what happens when one person, one state, one whatever attacks another is that, among many other things, is that the attacked party's options are narrowed against their will. If I walk down a street and somebody walks up to me and tries to kick me, then my options are very much narrowed by that, and I didn't consent to it. But whatever I do, it is happening. And that means that I am free only insofar as I can pick from the limited options that the attacker has left me. The sort of non-fighting option is I don't do anything. I take the kick and hope that it's not going to happen again. I can try to avoid the kick if I'm quick enough and sort of try to fight back and make sure that a second kick doesn't come. But typically, an attack isn't a singular event. Typically, in the real world, one transgression first isn't over in a second, isn't without relevant damage that is being done, and it's not something that will stop on its own. Typically, aggression just doesn't work like that. And that means that the logic that if I do nothing, there will not be a fight, do nothing in response to an attack, is flawed. There will be further violence. The question is how it's going to look. And the choice that is taken away by the aggression is whether there will be a fight or not. There will be a fight. The question is only, am I going to come? Am I going to be passive, or am I going to fight back? And that is the choice that I'm limited to. The choice I do not have, no longer have, is whether there is violence or not. Because there is going to be violence either way, whatever I do. And that means that if we follow the surface grammar of fighting words, if we assume that responsibility rests with all those who fight, then we assign responsibility in a way that seems causally wrong. The situation of violence that makes us dislike the fight isn't caused by the attack party. It's caused by the attacker. And the attacker has limited the choice, the influence of the attacked. And we would be very wrong to skew things that way from the beginning of the discourse. That is, from the question onwards, what caused this fight? If the ironclad assumption is that in fights the responsibility for that moral evil is always shared by all sides to some degree, then we will have overpowered the causal logic, the real world logic of fighting, that narrowing of options we do to others, the causing of violent situations by one side. And this sounds very abstract. I've sort of made an effort not to use too many morally charged words up until now, but this will change, promise. What does this mean concretely in the evaluation of real situations? It means that if a fight happens, again, on the street, we will be inclined to not care very much about who's in the wrong. You brawled, you are in the wrong. And that is sandbox logic. And that is another implication that I think is there. This view that all who fight are in the wrong presupposes that the situations that lead to people fighting are all of the same moral cloth. That they are all in such a way that if at least one side was being reasonable, the situation could be resolved without a quarrel. And the attacker does have that choice. If the attacker were being reasonable, then there would be no fight. However, whether the attacked is being reasonable or not is entirely irrelevant to whether there is going to be a fight, whether there's going to be violence. Now imagine how harmful it is to assign blame for a violent situation based not on the realities of causality, but on an abstract principle that falls apart under the smallest scrutiny. Imagine what, psychologically speaking, that does to the victim of an attack who fought back. Now, I work with children as a coach, and I know that sometimes children will have quarrels which are, for want of a better word, stupid. They should be resolved peacefully. The question who attacked whom is sort of irrelevant because the underlying reasons are hormonal or social and not really all that relevant. What's important is to stop the fight before it gets too bad. But it's important, I think, that we do care who is attacking and who is defending and who is doing what. We may choose to abstract from that from time to time and take that kind of kindergarten teacher in the sandbox approach to a conflict. But it's very, very important morally that we don't stop caring in general about who started the conflict, causally speaking, and who therefore is morally responsible for the violent situation existing. And this, I think, is the core flaw of pacifism. And by pacifism, I do not mean a position which tries to avoid violence. We should all try to avoid violence. But what I mean here is a position which is not as infrequent as one should think, that since any violence is the responsibility of all who are involved to some degree, we should never fight. That being involved in a fight is a moral wrong, is an action contrary to duty. I don't think that this is the case. I think that by the measure of almost all moral theories, there are situations under which it is not simply allowable to fight, but under which one is obligated to fight, morally speaking, in which one should fight. To apply one of my favorite moral theories, the categorical imperative, a world in which nobody ever fights back against aggression would be quite the horrible world. And indeed, it would be morally so much worse than one in which, under certain circumstances, people do fight back against aggression. And all this sounds so simple when I take it apart like that. But there are many people out there who tacitly, unknowingly, I think, hold to the implications that I examined in the first part of this video, and hold to a kindergarten sandbox view of morality. And that often leads to a privileging of not fighting, of the act of not fighting, that I think is very problematic. I simply don't buy it that fighting is always worse than not fighting, morally speaking. It is, I think, outright silly to assume that moral reason prefers non-confrontation. Of course, it is reasonable to look for peaceful solutions, but it is not, I think, reasonable to pretend that peaceful solutions exist when they clearly don't, at least not for the moment. I would say that there is a certain duty, morally speaking, to be open to peaceful solutions of a conflict in the future, in the abstract, principled readiness to resolve something peacefully. However, it is no one's duty to pretend that an attacker can be reasoned with when the evidence shows that it is not the case. So I think I sort of lost my thread there. What I was going for was to show what this means in practice. If we let ourselves be captured by the surface grammar of the words surrounding fighting, then we are in great danger of victim blaming. We are indeed likely, we're almost on a certain track to blaming the victims of aggression for the aggression happening. And we're not blaming them because we have some reason to think that they contributed to the aggression occurring. We are in danger of blaming them because the way we view conflict as a whole has led us there. And I think the argumentative structures of victim blaming that we are well acquainted with, that especially feminists are very acquainted with, are not honest theorizing about the situation at hand. Rather, I think that they are attempts at rationalization. What is being rationalized is the feeling that all sides of a conflict must be to blame. This is something that is so ingrained that we don't even have to mention it for it to be active in discourse. Nobody has to bring up the adage that we started with. We're so acquainted with it. We're so deeply invested in its logic that we are prepared to find absurd rationalizations for it to hold in a specific case. And we are prepared, and this is sort of the social, moral aspect of that, we are prepared to throw the victims under the bus so that we do not have to examine our moral standards, our way of looking at situations involving violence. And I think that we should do better than that. And as sort of a final note here, I would like to add that this structure of argumentation and this structure induced by the logic of fighting words, by the grammar of fighting words, doesn't only hold in interpersonal violent situations. It also holds on the state-to-state level, it holds on a social level, it holds basically anywhere. And I think that with some of the German public's reaction, Western public's reaction to the war on Ukraine, the genocidal war of aggression that the Russian Federation is still waging on Ukraine, has shown how deeply ingrained that sandbox view of conflict is. And much work has been done by others to expose how problematic it is in a historical sense, how much arrogance is involved to see things like that, how factually untenable it is once you take a good look at the conflict as it really is. But I hope that by analyzing this complex of concepts, I can contribute in a very small way to add some clarity to at least some people's view of the situation in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine. All right. Thank you for listening and see you next time. Bye.